You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Well, you probably know the words of that. It's called the caution. It's what a police officer says to you if you're arrested. And it's a powerful reminder, if we need one, that words matter very much. I have, as a judge, had to explain that hundreds of times to juries during trials. The whole Bible comes with a massive caution when it comes to speech, the use of our tongues, what you say or don't say, when you say it, how you speak, truth or lies, with kindness or harshly. And it all matters because, as one of those songs we sang a moment ago reminded us, God is a talking God. Yes, he's transcendent. He's above space and time. He's independent of the created universe, but he's also personal. He's a person who talks. His first act in Genesis is to speak, "Let there be light," and it happens. He creates all things by his powerful word. He rules through his word. His word is truth. He reveals through his word. We know God through his words. He rescues by his word. Jesus himself, God's supreme manifestation, his ultimate self-expression, if you like, is described as the Word. And we are God's image bearers. We're talking people. Our words have moral status in the sight of God. And God expects us somehow to reflect his own careful speech, to think his thoughts after him, and to repeat what he says. To be careful of what he says, to listen to it, but also to be careful of what we say. Because ultimately our speech reflects who we really are. And that's the point James makes there in James 3, which we read. Both walk in the footprints of Proverbs. Jesus and James both walk in the footprints of Proverbs. So our speaking is a kind of barometer of the whole of our ethical life. Our speech, our tongues, our mouths are the ultimate reflection of who we are, an unmistakable indicator of our hearts. Do you remember as a child the GP who may, even if you're over 50, have visited you at home, always asked you, whatever the diagnosis was, to stick out your tongue? And he or she seemed to be able to tell a great deal from looking at your tongue, whatever was going on in your life. Sticking it out was essential to any diagnosis. And that, in a way, is a sort of parable of spiritual reality. What comes out of our mouths is usually an accurate index of what's happening in our lives and health. Control the tongue, and you've got your whole personality in check in the Bible's understanding. Well, it's under 1% of the body mass. It's an instrument, an organ of extraordinary power, out of all proportion to its size. It punches above its weight. That's James's point. Martin Luther wrote of that little bit of flesh between the jaws, which he said is a concealed and dangerous weapon. And whatever its anatomical connections, its most significant connection is to the heart, whether hardened by sin or recreated by grace. As Jesus said in Luke 6:45, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Our tongues are attached by a puppet string to our hearts. And Proverbs 10:20 makes a similar point. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver, but the heart of the wicked is of little value. Or Proverbs 15:7, the lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the heart of fools. Well, we're in Proverbs these Sunday evenings, and tonight we're on the theme of our words. Words matter. Communication is a key theme of the whole book of Proverbs. And there's simply no way to exaggerate the life-giving or life-taking power of words. Look at chapter 18, verse 21. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. James 3:10 makes a similar point. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. It's extraordinary. It's an inconsistency which is not impossible, we know that, but it's always incongruous. Listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 12 to the people of his day. It's a sobering section of Matthew 12. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And then verse 36, I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty or careless word they have spoken. For by your words you'll be acquitted, and by your words you'll be condemned. Our words, our speech, what we say and how we say it is so perfectly a reflection of what's going on in our hearts that according to Jesus, there won't even be a need to evaluate our works on the day of judgment. All that will be needed is a recording of our conversations, public and private. And your words either make clear that you're a born-again disciple and a lover of Jesus Christ, or they'll betray you as one who knows nothing of God and his saving grace. That's sobering, isn't it? It's an alarming level of accountability. One of the things about being a judge is that every word I uttered in court, in public, was on a transcript. That concentrates your mind on how you behave in court, believe me. A perfect record of your words. Every word spoken is heard by the Lord. It's on the transcript of life. And our words, we know only too well, have a remarkable capacity to create and destroy, to uplift or depress, to heal or to hurt, to excite or to bore, to manipulate or to mold. No communication that you utter is ever neutral. I remember reading a little bit of doggerel somewhere. A careless word may kindle strife. A cruel word may wreck a life. A bitter word may hate instill. A brutal word may smite and kill. No, this is a serious business because of all the creatures on the planet, human beings alone have this ability to use sophisticated language to shape and mold the world. Sticks and stones can only break our bones, but words can be literally soul-destroying. Well, one verse in every 6, about 150 verses in Proverbs, are devoted to the tongue, to speech, to words, and how we talk. And of course, we can only look selectively tonight. And the reason is that the tongue is either the greatest of blessings, which may reflect wisdom and accomplish a world of good, or they may be the most lethal and destructive of weapons. The mark of the fool in Proverbs, able to generate endless evil. And in Proverbs, it becomes very clear quite early on that you can easily recognize the fool in Proverbs terms, just as you can the wise by their words. Try to listen, if you haven't already, to Charlie's 23rd of June morning sermon from this chapter, Proverbs 26. He had 3 headings: speaking too quickly, speaking too slowly, and knowing what to say. They all related to wisdom and timing in speech, and it set the scene well for me. I hope we might look briefly and necessarily selectively at 3 things now. Here they are: using words to harm, using words to hide, and then using words to help. Now, my brief is principally the first of those, and we'll touch on the others. But first, I want to develop a little bit further what our words tell us about the character of a person and what our words can accomplish. We've already seen that more than anything else, our words are a barometer of what's in the heart. Jesus said as much repeatedly. Well, let's look at some Proverbs illustrations. Proverbs 10 is a good chapter on this theme. Chapter 10, verse 11, the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Or 21, the lips of the righteous nourish many, but fools die for lack of sense. Or 32, the lips of the righteous know what finds favor, but the mouth of the wicked only what is perverse. Or on to 15:2, the tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. Well, you know how it works. None of this is to deny that even the wise and the righteous on occasions let slip a wayward word or fail to guard what we say. In James 3, verse 2, James says, we all stumble in many ways. We know that. No, the shock in the Bible's understanding is what can come out of the same mouth. We sing God's praise at the morning service and then pull people to pieces over coffee with the same tongue and sometimes under the same roof. Well, what can our words accomplish? Again, Proverbs helps us. Just two brief thoughts. First, our words can lead to personal downfall and destruction. 26:26, it's there in our passage. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Or 14:3, a fool's mouth lashes out with pride, but the lips of the wise protect them. Or chapter 8, verses 6 and 7, the lips of fools bring them strife, and their mouths invite a beating. The mouths of fools are their undoing, and their lips are a snare to their very lives. Or 13:3, those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin. It's not that the fool deliberately pursues their own destruction, but that they're so impetuous and rash and reckless with their words that they in effect invite their own punishment and rebuke. The trouble when you say something hurtful is that you can never unsay it. It's out there. And haven't we all had the experience where you've said something and instantly regretted it? It's so painful. And words, we know, can destroy reputations. They can trigger violence. We've seen that this week. They can damage children psychologically. They can pollute everything like toxic chemicals. Well, I've seen instances of all those things as you have. Careless speech almost always boomerangs back on the speaker, bringing devastation. It was a point that Times leader made a couple of weeks back on the 17th of July. The heading was "Careless Words Cost Interests." And in fact, the piece was critical of David Lammy, the now Foreign Secretary, who is in fact a very, very nice man. He, you remember, had said things about Donald Trump in his time in opposition. He'd called Mr. Trump a neo-Nazi sociopath, a dangerous clown, a tyrant in a toupee, various unpleasant things. And the point of the article was not to support or criticize Trump. It was about the boomerang effect of words. Not a great foundation if he's now likely to face building a relationship with the American authorities post their election if Mr. Trump wins. The column ended with the Clement Attlee quote, which you'll know, which might well have come from Proverbs. A period of silence on your part would now be welcome. But then second, our words have power to pervert and alienate others. Look at 16, 27 and 28. A scoundrel plots evil, and on their lips it's like a scorching fire. A perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. Or 28, 18 and 19. Like a maniac shooting flaming arrows of death is one who deceives their neighbor and says, "I was only joking." And I'm sure there's a lesson here about misdirected humor. We need to be careful here. It's no answer to damage done or hurt caused simply to say, I was only joking. The Bible knows that. And what the writer here has in mind, I think, is the sort of person who has no desire to use language constructively or for good, or that friendship may be strengthened. No, this sort of speech burns up relationships. And, it's often not done by a blatant lie. Or it's more often done by an innuendo or a sort of raised eyebrow, metaphorically. You'll not believe what I've heard about so-and-so. Were you aware that so-and-so? Or keep this to yourself, but... And the direction of travel is almost always destructive. The preacher in Ecclesiastes 10:13 knew the problem of the fool's words. At the beginning, their words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness. We can hardly overstate this. This is James's point. The tongue is an arsonist in James. That chip of broken glass, the discarded ember after the picnic, it causes a spark and it sets the whole forest ablaze. Words can, as we say, go viral in a second, and viruses tend not to end well. So what about words that harm? What kind of speech does Proverbs condemn here? In this book, the single biggest troublemaker in your life is probably your tongue. So here's the first set of things that are condemned, and they're here in the passage. Dishonest, lying, deceptive speech. Never lie is the Bible's message. Lies always harm. They destroy relationships in churches, in marriages, on CVs, in academic life, in politics, in the city, in courtrooms. Yeah, they may work temporarily, but truth tends to come out. One of the occupational hazards of the judiciary is that you are routinely lied to, virtually every day, and often very convincingly. Proverbs shows contempt for those who lie in courtrooms. False witnesses, they're repulsive to God. Occasionally we got indignant defendants who'd watched too much US TV, and they would demand lie detector tests in court, which, as you know, aren't used in English courts. One of my more robust women colleagues told a defendant one day, in no uncertain terms, I'm the lie detector in this court. Chapter 12, verse 22, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Or 6:17, 6 things the Lord hates, and one is lying lips. Or 4:24, keep your mouth free of perversity, keep corrupt talk far from your lips. And here in our passage, 26:28, a lying tongue hates those it hurts. And by contrast, back in 24:26, an honest answer is like a kiss on the lips. And a kiss on the lips is a sort of special act of intimacy. And that verse is an important reminder, I think, that fundamentally any lie, stripped back to its core, represents a lack of love. And that's why it's serious. Because truth-telling matters for people who are made in the image of God, who cannot lie, and who is always dead straight with us in all his dealings. All lying is off limits. God's Spirit will never work through dishonest words, however much you lie to yourself about your motives. And then second, and this is in the passage too, the second sort of speech that's condemned seems to be slander and malicious gossip and quarreling. There it is in 26:22. The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts. Not only is a bit of gossip tempting, it's kind of addictive. We love gossip. We love negative information about other people. It is extraordinary. We love controversy. We find it delicious. It's a sort of delicacy to our corrupt hearts. And the same proverb exactly appears at chapter 18, verse 8. We gulp down gossip and slander, and then, like sort of verbal bulimics, bring it up again somewhere else. You know, it's a cancer in the body of Christ, and it comes in many disguises. You know the definition of gossip? Gossip is a form of malicious talk indulged in by other people. In fact, it's listed in Romans 1:29 as one of the sins of the person who is, to be blunt, an idolater. Or 11:13, Proverbs. A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. This is a person, I think, who can't handle confidentiality. And again, that's a huge problem in church life. It's the person whose mindset is, look, I hate repeating gossip, but what else can I do with it? I read in a church blog this week the sarcastic observation that confidentiality in the Church of England means that you only tell one person at a time. And sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes it's malicious. Often it's just weakness and indiscretion. And what is said may well be true, but it may not be helpful. Knowledge is power. We love, don't we, to be in the know. When I share information, you don't know my status is elevated. Information is power. And everybody, you know, has a best friend that they trust to share information with. But the trouble is that person also has a best friend. And so it goes on. You can and must control the information that comes to you, but you can never control the information that comes from you. We hate it, chapter 26, verse 17, when a quarrel or dispute is settled before we have a chance to reveal it to other people. So don't butt into quarrels that aren't your business, says the author. So how do we address gossip and slander and quarrels and so on? It's there in 26, verses 20 and 21. Do you see that? It's 20 and 21. Without wood, a fire goes out. Without gossip, a quarrel dies down. As charcoal to embers and as wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome person for kindling strife. What do you do when you're faced with this? You take away the fuel. You interrupt. You challenge. You walk away. You say, what's the evidence? You ask, is this something I should be talking to the person about directly? Is my gossip really a way of complaining without confronting? Is this the kind of thing I would want people sharing about me? Well, you can't have a fire without wood. Evil words die without a welcome. So just stop the gossip. Don't be quarrelsome. With every unkind word that goes unconfronted, a reputation dies. So much is at stake in our words, friends. They matter, not just to us, but even more, far more, they matter to God. And we're always speaking before the face of God. And that's an immense responsibility. Here's a third thing that Proverbs prohibits: all forms of flattery. It's there in 26:28. A flattering mouth works ruin. Or 28:23. Whoever rebukes a person will in the end gain favor rather than the one who has a flattering tongue. Or 29:5. Those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets for their feet. Flattery is dangerous because it goes way beyond the sort of righteous and loving affirmation that we all need and want and should be sharing with one another. We need more of that. No, flattery is really a form of lying. It's done not to build up, but to butter up. It's done not to support, but to schmooze, to gain personal advantage. You do it for you. when you're flattering someone? The flatterer is almost invariably after something from the flattered. And it's a net that traps. Instead of helping the listener get an accurate picture of their strengths and weaknesses, the flatterer deliberately gives them an inflated, unrealistic self-view. It was Adlai Stevenson who used to say, flattery is all right as long as you don't inhale. But the problem is we do. And the essence of foolishness in Proverbs and its destructiveness in Proverbs as in life is not to see yourself as you really are. And flattery prevents that. The person we flatter may go in the wrong direction, they may choose a wrong career, they may waste their money, or they may become puffed up with pride in a way that damages them. Our flattery harms them. It distorts their reality. And like all well-laid traps, flattery hides itself, but when the trap springs and the net comes up, the victim is helpless. Well, those are words that harm. And Proverbs is full of teaching about them that we need to hear. We need to be utterly realistic about what we say. We need to know it may have considerable potential to do real harm. Reckless words, unguarded words, too many words, ill-timed words, blurted out words. We know only too well how they can damage relationships and disrupt friendships and divide people and destroy peace and dishonor God. I've just got time for mention of the two other headings. Here's the next one. We've looked at some words that harm. Here are some words that hide. I don't think I'd really connected with this until I looked again at verse 23. Do you see that? Chapter 26. Like a coating of silver dross on earthenware are fervent lips with an evil heart. Enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they harbor deceit. Though their speech is charming, do not believe them, for 7 abominations fill their hearts. You get the picture. Silver can cover clay to produce a beautiful-looking jar. But the silver's wafer thin. It looks like a silver jar, but that's not the reality. And it's a solemn warning, especially for those of us in the church who can be experts at saying the right things and putting on the right front. We do it all the time, don't we? We dissimulate. The words match the masks we wear. And the writer says, you're not ultimately going to be able to hide behind empty words, sanctimonious jargon, pious platitudes as a disguise for heartfelt devotion. It's the heart problem again. We use words to hide what's really going on in our lives and heads and hearts. Chapter 14, verse 23 says, mere talk leads to poverty. Financial poverty, relational poverty, spiritual poverty. We can't conceal it. You're not going to be able to disguise before God the reality of your character by thinking that you can take the earthenware part of your life and simply glaze it over with all kinds of terminology that make people think you're in the know and on track. And we do that all the time in church environments. We become adept at hiding the poverty of our own spiritual life behind words, charming speech, garnished with grace. But look, it's a thin disguise. Ultimately, it is hypocrisy. And end of verse 26, it'll be exposed in the assembly. Hypocrisy is crooked speech. It's speaking with a forked tongue. And Proverbs says we're to have nothing to do with it. I loved Westerns as a boy growing up in the 1950s. I had all the kit. And a few years ago, I got to go to Tombstone, Arizona, and go to the OK Corral. It was fabulous. I loved it. Unforgettable. You knew where you were with the Westerns, didn't you? The cowboys were always the goodies, and the Indians were the baddies. And the Indians always, strangely, spoke with forked tongues. Do you remember that? It was absurd, of course. But the problem is real enough. And it's got nothing to do with ethnicity. It's got everything to do with the universal tendency to use words, to hide, to mislead, to dissemble. And that problem is, I'm afraid, alive and well in the church. And we need to repent of it. Well, words that harm, words that hide, and finally just a sentence or two on words that help. This is a whole other talk. We haven't time to, I wish we'd more time to look at these things tonight. There's just not time to savor all the extraordinary positives in Proverbs that would help us. Verse after verse has extraordinary insight into this matter of talk. You escape most of the trouble in your life if you watch your mouth. Good people, good words, make people glad in Christ. And when a whole church does that together, why, it begins almost to feel like revival. It's extraordinary. Do you see some of these verses? Chapter 10, verse 11, the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life. Chapter 15, verse 4, the soothing tongue is a tree of life. And, the power of the tongue can be employed to encourage, to affirm, to enrich, to reconcile, to forgive, to unite, to smooth, to bless. Think of almost any positive verb you can, and words matter to it. There are beautiful earrings that adorn the wearer. There are beautiful ornaments that enhance a home. And in perhaps some of the best-known phraseology in Proverbs, there are chapter 25, verse 11, like apples of gold in settings of silver. I love that phrase because you'll be reassured to note that it's applied in its context simply to the ruling of a good judge in a routine case. And that's immensely encouraging. Or chapter 16, verse 24. Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Honey's pleasant to taste, and it's also a bit medicinal, isn't it? It's good if you've got a sore throat or something. Well, so it is with gracious, pleasant words, rather than biting cynicism or criticism or condescension. Ask yourself, if someone had been eavesdropping on my most recent conversations, would they use the words gracious and honey or sweetness to describe the tone of what I'd been saying? Well, I don't know. I've loved this, and I've had this little acronym in my head for years. Think. T, is it true? How sure are you of the facts? H, is it helpful? Does knowing this and passing it on do any good to anyone? I, is it inspiring? Is this something that'll serve as a model or warning? N, is it necessary? Does this really need to be said? And K, is it kind? Or is there malice there? I used to say when people joined my chambers, when I was still at the bar, I used to say to them, look, don't try to be clever. Everybody's clever here. Try to be kind. Think. If words that harm are reckless and unguarded and too numerous, words that help are always honest and thought out and calm and kind and few and gentle and persuasive and life-affirming and nourishing and restorative. How often have you had the experience on a Sunday even of just a simple word of greeting or affirmation or kindness from a fellow Christian you've met here, which has suddenly made you feel strong again, glad to be alive, pleased you're a Christian? It's chased away anxiety. It's lifted your soul. Wise words, we learn, are spoken at the right time. They avoid problems and they promote success. In short, they are the product of wisdom, which we've been thinking about for weeks. They make us more like Jesus. Our words make our thoughts and our hearts visible and audible. And as James says, chapter 3, verse 2, managing your speech can be a way to get your whole self under control. Jesus was perfect and his speech was perfect. No one was more filled with kindness and gentle answers than Jesus. No one had a wiser, more loving, more healing tongue than he had. He was the only person in the whole of history who never spoke an unguarded, self-indulgent word. He never opened his lips in a way which did harm or damage to anyone. He never spoke when silence was better, and every word he spoke was perfect. We can hardly believe it. But that's the standard. That's what we aspire to. And that's, they said of him, even his enemies said of him in John 7:46, no one ever spoke the way this man does. Well, that's the challenge to wise speech in Proverbs. Through it, we actually communicate something of the very life of God to others. That's why speech matters. It's such a privilege. It's a daunting daily responsibility. Little wonder that when David faced up to all this, in Psalm 141:3, he prayed, "Set a guard over my mouth, Lord. Keep watch over the door of my lips." Let me pray for us as we close. Lord, set a guard over the door of our mouths, that those unhealthy things that are in our hearts would not be allowed to bubble to the surface and be blurted out, but only those things which are helpful for building up others according to their needs and for your glory. Amen.